With great pleasure, Lawrence, floor's open to you.
Thank you. It seems to me we're here really to build bridges. The only question we don't know is whether it'll be a long bridge or a short bridge. For me, they asked Gandhi what he thought about Western civilization. His response was he thought it would be a good idea. I have the same thought about capitalism. I think that it would be a good idea, not the way it's currently structured. It seems to me that we've got a one-legged animal here, financial capital. We're not taking into account human capital, we're not taking into account environmental capital, we're not taking into account cultural capital, heritage capital, health capital. We've created really a monster that only represents one aspect of life, and we're pretending, or have pretended up to now, that it represents all aspects of life. We've got to such a stage now with these earrings. Apparently world debt through the banks is 1.2 quadrillion. I mean, how you get your head around that in unresolved credit default swaps and property loans and so on. I don't necessarily see the past years from 1688 as a total disaster. I need to share that with you. I'm happier to live now than I would have been, I think, in 1688. I think more of us have freedoms now that we didn't have then. More of us have the ability to speak now that we didn't have then. So this fractional-based usury system has been a curse and in some ways a small blessing, given us the freedom to be here tonight to discuss the issue. But like a booster rocket in a spaceship, any of us that have seen a space shot know that a booster rocket can only take us so far. It has a specific purpose. The purpose is to reach an escape velocity of 17,500 miles an hour. That is to be able to lift itself from the Earth's gravitational pull. When that is completed, the function of the booster is completed. It is not right, it is not wrong, it has taken us to a specific place. But it can take us no further. And this is the point which, as I'm concerned, we're discussing this evening. It can take us no further. We are, at this meeting, recognizing that the skill is blowing the explosive bolts and allowing this booster to fall back to Earth. And we're designing the second stage, and the second stage won't look anything like the first stage. Interesting, just an aside, I was always interested who actually won the Battle of Waterloo. And I studied deeply about Napoleon's banking ideas. And of course, it was a close-run thing till the mid-afternoon, until Bouchler, with the Belgian mercenaries, joined the battle and tipped the scale. So if they were Belgian mercenaries, who backed them? Who paid for them? The Rothschilds. Interesting. So who won the Battle of Waterloo?
Rothschild.
The Rothschilds.
Remember, Belgium was a country invented by the British to annoy the French.
Okay. So what I'm saying is I'm equally aware of the manipulations that have taken us to where we are and have studied them in sufficient detail. What I'm seeing and what I find very encouraging is that very serious organizations are beginning to have significant discussions around what the second stage of this space shot would look like. I think space shot's quite a good analogy, really, because we're a spaceship. We just live on the outside, not on the inside. The Institute of Chartered Accountants, obviously Richard had to leave, has set up an organization called the Finance Lab. And the Finance Lab are looking at different structures for the future of finance. And are going to actually set up projects to see what are working, what isn't working. Now, we're presuming there isn't going to be a total collapse. And there's a possibility that there will be a total collapse. So there are two discussions to have here. One is the long bridge, and the other's really the short bridge. I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on the Long Bridge, and then we can talk about a total collapse and what that would mean. So the Long Bridge looks a bit like this. It looks a bit like taking financial capital, as I said before, and looking at other capitals and giving them value. Environmental capital has a value. It's a guy called Pavan Sukhdev. Pavan created the economics of the environment and biodiversity systems. And he, through connecting with a small department in a government organization in India that had lots of data around climatic crises and the costs of climatic crises, was able to ascertain what the cost of environmental destruction was. And so Pavan now is able to go to a country and say, you said you had 7% growth? You actually destroyed 2% of your rainforest. In doing that, you changed climate. In doing that, you cause greater suffering amongst the poor, etc., etc. And that actually cost you 3% of GDP growth. So you're talking in terms of 7%, but that's not what you experienced. Or do you go to the Chinese and say, if you go to Beijing, or I just come back from Beijing last night, Beijing or Shanghai, you can't see the sun. You cannot see the sun. It's just smog. Everywhere is smog. 7% of the Chinese population suffer from asthmatic or bronchial conditions. That has an impact on GDP. It has an impact on health. And so one could go to the Chinese authorities and say, you claim 7% GDP growth? What about the 7% of your population that are suffering bronchial troubles, etc.? That's costing you 2 or 3 or 4% of GDP growth. So if you want to argue the Long Bridge, there are very intelligent discussions now taking place that are beginning to look at environmental capital as a contributory factor to GDP. And let me tell you, human capital and the value of human capital isn't far behind that. And so there is a very interesting and exciting discussion going on. Why I'm here? I'm interested in Sharia. I like the idea of Sharia for one main reason. Sharia seems to me to say, rather than with the usury-based credit system, you owe me, Sharia seems to be a more partnership model. We're partners. It isn't a case of you owe me money, it's a case of we share the profits, we share the dividends, we share the rent. We don't have interest. So for me, Sharia and the power behind Sharia could be a very powerful influence, certainly with the countries that could take responsibility for Sharia and take it seriously and not be manipulated by the West in calling interest something else in a clever way. I think that Sharia could be an interesting bridge and a powerful bridge that should be explored, and in fact I'm encouraging Finance Lab to do exactly that in one of our projects. What I'm witnessing in the West and the East is something really quite interesting. In the West, and I'm talking here of North America and Europe, huge resources are being placed in what's breaking down to stop what's breaking down. Massive resources, huge commitments to keep the existing status quo. In the emerging countries of Brazil, India and China that I visit on a regular basis, there is much greater interest in what is breaking through what is breaking down. And so I'm seeing opportunities in these emerging countries which aren't existing here. And part of that, what is breaking through what is breaking down, is around the financial system. So I share your encouragement that there are some very, very interesting and dynamic moves at a very, very, very high level, levels of sovereign debt and so on. I'll be brief. The underlying problem for me is what Peter spoke about so eloquently. This is a problem that may look like a crisis in environment or a crisis in finance